So the truth is, what we need a life that we don't want to escape from anymore.
Patti Clark is the award-winning author of This Way Up, 7 Tools for Unleashing Your Creative Self and Transforming Your Life. Her own experience as a middle-aged woman in recovery is deeply reflected in her new book, Recovery Road Trip, which she joins me today to talk about on Uncorking a Story. Welcome to Uncorking a Story, Patti.
Thank you so much, Mike. I'm so happy to be here.
I'm happy to have you here, Patti. I'm curious, where does your story as an author begin?
Well, my story as an author begins later than my story as a writer, because my writing journey began when I was quite young as journaling. I've always loved journaling. I love words. Even when I was quite young, I loved words. I grew up in a very dysfunctional family, and I learned from a couple of people who were important in my life that journaling could help me process the chaos. So I started writing as a teenager and kept journals for, well, I've always kept journals. I still do. And Julia Cameron, The Artist's Way, was a huge influence on me in my 20s and 30s. And then when I actually began writing as an author, I had been running workshops for women in the small town where I lived in New Zealand, and we did a lot of work around creativity, different forms of creativity to connect with the deeper self. So we did meditation, creativity, visualization, things like that. And when we finished running a workshop, women invariably said, "I don't want to stop. I want to keep going." And we journaled a lot in the workshops. And I would say, "Well, just keep journaling." And they said, "It's hard to do unless we've got something." So because of some prompting from those women, I wrote This Way Up, 7 Tools for Uncovering Your Creative Self and Transforming Your Life. And which the first half is a allegorical story, and the second half is a 12-week journaling workbook. And a lot of the exercises came from the workshops that I was doing. And then several years later, I don't know how, I have a lot of things, a lot of different paths I could go down here, but my own recovery story impacted my second book. I was in recovery from addiction for almost 13 years. And then I moved to a small town in New Zealand, and I quit going to meetings, and I sort of journeyed off and was out drinking again for almost 13 years again, and then came back in the program. And when I say the program, a 12-step program. Mm-hmm. And when I got back, I was really curious to learn from other women who had relapsed. Why? Why did they relapse? What was it with them? And I was running workshops online again. And I asked a lot of women that I met. I have no idea how many, lots and lots. And I would take notes, but it's an anonymous program, so I wasn't writing down who was saying it. I was just taking copious notes in my journals. And what I realized is that there were several similar strands that happened with women. And I got the nudge that sort of felt like a push, like after my first book, I said, "I'm never doing this again." But I got this nudge that said, this needs to be a book. And so I wrote Recovery Road Trip.
Talk to me about that nudge. I'm curious. Where did the nudge come from?
Well, I believe it sort of comes from that inner self and that sort of connection to our higher self that sort of, sort of taps us and then gives us a little shake, and then pretty soon it feels as though, all right. So the nudge felt like this needs to be said. And similar to what a lot of other writers have written and said, if you can't find the book that you're looking for, write it. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't find any books about sort of women in recovery especially, and women that relapse especially, and what goes on. Because in the recovery journey, there's often a a time which feels almost elated, wonderful, everything's going right, everything's exciting. And then life happens. And it's sort of like, well, this isn't fun anymore. And this is hard and things. And if we aren't connected in a way that feels supportive, which I wasn't before I relapsed, we can find ourselves romanticizing about what it used to be like. And that's what started happening for me. And so that I was looking for that book. I wanted other people to tell me what their experience was. And so I got the nudge and the voice in my head that said, go ahead, go on now. You write that book.
Yeah. And that's, writing a book, obviously, not obviously. Um, it's not an easy process for many of us. And some books that I've written in the past were easier, came out of me a lot easier than others. And every time it's like when I run a half marathon, I always think to myself, gosh, I don't think I could ever do this again. Or I don't know how people do this, times two and run a full marathon. And then when I'm done writing a book, I'm like, I don't know that I could go through that process again.
Exactly.
But then something happens, some inspiration comes, and the universe is like, well, we're not done with you yet.
We're not done with you yet. Exactly.
We need you to do something else. But one thing I want to draw some parallels on, if there are, and I'm just curious to know if there are. Now, you mentioned starting like a writers group for women where it sounded like you're doing some meditation, some journaling, and that's a group activity where you're supporting each other and you're bringing out something from other people and you're kind of working together. And you also mentioned, being part of, a 12-step or a recovery group. Are there parallels between those two and the way that they work in your life?
Great question, Mike. I've never really thought about it. Absolutely, in one way. There's a wonderful, wonderful quote by Johann Hari that says, the opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection. And I believe that connection with people is vital. And so in the writing process, I know that a lot of times if I'm feeling stuck or I'm like, I have no inspiration. I can't write anything. I'm, blah, 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 all that inner garbage. I can be around other people and get sparked or at least feel supported. And, another wonderful quote by Annie Lamott, don't worry about your first draft. Write a shitty first draft. Just get something out. Shitty first draft. That's all you need. You can go back and work on it later. And so for me, that connection with other people helps me get out that shitty first draft. That first one that instead of looking at the blank screen like, oh, I can't do this. I can't do this. So that connection, that would be the similarity and that support in both recovery and in a writing community.
Yeah, I love that notion of the opposite of addiction is community. I've never heard it before, and I think it's beautiful. Because so much what drives us to self-destructive behaviors, I can speak from my own experience, is feeling alone. It's this feeling as if, maybe it's feeling alone. Maybe it's feeling like you don't matter at some level. But, I also find that when I'm around other people and I'm doing something, there's no desire to partake in anything. That's just me personally. But I also know that being around other people is also what fuels my creativity. That's where stories kind of come from. I spend a lot of time on the road in my day job, traveling. I run focus groups for a living, we call them focus. We don't really do focus groups anymore. It's more that business has changed. But the point is I'm around other people a lot, and I derive a lot of energy and inspiration from meeting new people. And I just love that notion of community being, kind of part of recovery and
absolutely. And I think as a writer, I'd be interested in your feedback on this. One of the things that I have really learned is that when I listen and just listen, things percolate. Like there was a lot of things when I was writing Recovery Road Trip when I would ask women about their own journeys. And when I just listened and didn't interrupt and didn't add my own experience, I could listen and go, oh, wow, yeah, I see how that interchanges with mine, but it adds a whole new piece. And taking notes and listening to those, it's wonderful, and that comes from that connection again.
Yeah. What have you learned? What are some big lessons that you've learned and perhaps documented in Recovery Road Trip in terms of parallels between sort of why people well, might not be the situation that they're in, or why people are turning to, alcohol, drugs, or whatever it is to sort of, um, sort of, I don't know, want to say fix something inside them, but address something maybe that they feel like they're missing.
Um, yeah, absolutely. Again, I'm going to go back to another person that I very much respect and want to quote, and that's Gabor Mate. And he talks about the connection to, or when you get behind the addiction, no matter what the addiction is, right? Alcohol, drugs, sex, shopping, food, screens. It's when we're feeling uncomfortable in ourselves. But when we're talking about especially with drugs, alcohol, yeah, sex, yeah, shopping, we're trying to make ourselves feel better. And it generally responds to trauma, something in our past that we are trying to fix. And what Gabor Mate points out is that don't ask why why are you using it. It's more, what was it helping? Because when, and I'll speak for myself, but I know quite a few other addicts that would agree with this. When I was using alcohol or drugs, it was to fix that gaping big hole, right? And it did a good job. It numbed me out, completely numbed me out. I didn't hurt anymore. The problem is that thing becomes that thing to which we're addicted to becomes that which hurts us. And when we get to that point, it's not helping anymore. So then you have to look at, yeah, it helped for a while, but it's not anymore. So the truth is, what we need is we need a life that we don't want to escape from anymore. And for so many people I spoke to, creativity is instrumental, because when one is feeling that disconnected or that raw or that uncomfortable in our skin, when we practice creativity, whatever that looks like for you, whether it's writing, painting, dancing, cooking, whatever it looks like, then we generally connect to something larger than ourselves. And we start to heal and we start to feel more comfortable in our lives, and we don't necessarily want to run and escape from it.
Yeah, that quote is so powerful. We need a life that we don't want to escape from anymore. The
Mm.
big question is, how do we find that life? Let's say you're a 50-year-old, person. You've got so many years behind you of living one way, and believe your worldview is a certain way based on your upbringing, based on your own personal experiences, based on your own sort of triumphs and perceived failures. How do you pivot? How do you get to that life that you don't want to escape from anymore?
Excellent question. And the very first thing is that there has to be recognition. Like, shit, I'm just trying to escape here. I am not happy. I am not fulfilled. So that's number one. And then one has to be willing to step in the fire and go and explore what would bring me joy. Because if you hate your job, you're not happy in your family, you get home and you just drink because you don't want to be in your life or whatever, that's giving you that numb. Okay. And if you're not going to numb, that means you've got to stand in the fire and be uncomfortable and say, okay, so what do I have to look out here? And, for a person to say, well, find what brings you joy. If you're in a place that's painful, it's like, oh, F off, it's like, what brings me joy, you know? So that's not a good starting place generally. But it's sort of like, okay, What could you do today so that you don't want to escape from your life? What's one thing you could do? Unfortunately, what a lot of people do is go on screens, which is another addiction that's insane. But finding something that sparks that feel good, right? So exercise can be one because of what it does in one's brain. So exercise is a great alternative, and it's one that a lot of people who have been addicts gravitate toward, because it's something to do instead of doing the other. So exercise is a great one. Problem is that exercise can also become addictive, but almost anything can. But for me and the women that I've dealt with more, I talk about creativity because for it worked for me. Writing down, scratching on paper, scribbling, making X's on paper, that kind of, what I say, externalizing that internal process of chaos and turmoil that makes me feel like I cannot stay in my skin 1 minute longer. So finding something beyond numbing out. Okay. So for me, I encourage the women that I've worked with, try creativity, journal, play music, get a drum, put on loud music, stamp around a room, go put your hands in dirt and plant something, go find an elaborate recipe and painstakingly follow it. Hopefully, one's not a food addict as well, because that can lead down another path, right? But you get the idea. Connect, because when we are practicing creativity, we are connecting to something larger than ourselves, whether it's the writing process, painting, drawing, dancing, music.
You know what I'm hearing you say this, and I'm thinking to myself, what you're telling me, and this is what I'm hearing, and this may not be what you intend to communicate, but this is my takeaway, is find that inner child and play with them again. Because if you think about what you just said, go outside, get your hands dirty, write something, act, sing loudly. Those are all things that, I have 3 22-year-olds now, but those are all things that my kids did without any filter, without any direction. It was just so natural to them. And sometimes, as you're growing up, as you're socializing, you lose that part of yourself. I have this belief that little person is still inside us, and we need to feed them, and we need to let them come out and play sometimes. And, for me, that comes through in writing. It comes through in, I like to get outside and do stuff. But I'm curious as to your take on that. Is there something there about sort of playing with that inner child that we may have forgotten about?
Oh, hell yes. Hell yes. I mean, the other thing that I would automatically say is, if someone's in my position, and most addicts were, get some therapy. You don't got to do this alone. You really, really don't. As a matter of fact, trying to do it alone is a mistake, in my opinion. So get some therapy and then practice something. But a huge part of my therapy, and I think a lot of other people's therapy, was connect with that inner child. Absolutely. That deeper part that we've squashed. And when we let her or him out to actually play, we can absolutely find that joy. Mike, you're talking about tapping into that. We can find that joy again, because as a child, when we can touch that child before he or she was too damaged, there is just this boundless joy. And a lot of times that loud music, like you're saying, or you know, throwing paint on a canvas. I say, please don't worry about the fact you're not going to sell this painting. Go throw some paint at it, play with color, put your hands in it. And that is absolutely all about your inner child, setting that inner child free, being able to say, I want to play with this. The problem that I have found, excuse me, the problem that I found is that with the writing process, my inner child can come to play, and then that inner critic comes in, and that adult says, wait a minute, what about the punctuation here? Go back and check the spelling on that. That's a run-on sentence. I also taught English, which is, makes it difficult. So that's the other thing, again, that I go back to Annie Lamott with the shitty first draft.
Yeah.
Don't let that critic in. Go play with it. And I have a wonderful story, if I may, about that process with writing. One part in Recovery Road Trip where I was feeling kind of stuck, and I got to the road trip got to Taos, New Mexico, and suddenly when I was just sort of doing this, just putting out words or even just playing with it, blah blah blah, and I heard narration, and I'm not exaggerating. I heard narration, and I just started taking dictation, and I just started going. And this character that was in, that was, her name was Saskia. Saskia in Taos told me her story, and she just started talking, and it was so much fun. It was like, oh my gosh, it's like my feet were going like this because it was so much fun. I was just so excited. And it was because I had broken through that and I let that come out. And it was really, while I was taking dictation, there were no capital letters. There was no punctuation. I was just going. And at one point I even said out loud, please slow down, please slow down. I want to get it all in. This is really fun. And I just kept going. And it was a blast. And it was because I got out of the way. And that's part of that inner child exploration, I believe.
Yeah, you hit flow, right?
Yeah, I hit flow.
The universe responded positively to that.
Yes, exactly.
Sometimes I think, a lot of the times when we struggle with happiness as adults, it's because maybe our inner child is upset with us or disappointed with us somehow. Because our inner child might be like, you know what, I didn't when I was when we were young, we didn't plan on being in a codependent relationship, but here we are.
Here we are.
But here we are. And
fancy this.
that wasn't part of the plan, Mike, or whatever. Or you know what, we didn't plan on having this career that is sucking your soul. And I'm not saying that's true for me, but that's true for other people. I happen to really enjoy what I do for a living, but but I think it is that sort of that inner child, not necessarily being an inner critic, but like, hey, like just reminding us, like this wasn't supposed to be. Yeah,
this wasn't the plan.
This wasn't part of the plan.
Exactly. I totally agree. And if we can get quiet enough and listen, we will hear that, and we can get guidance from that inner self, that child, or that larger inner self, and we can get guidance. But when we're either using as an addict, or we're so busy that we don't have time, and when we do have time, we get on a screen and we don't listen, then it can just keep spiraling down. But when we can get quiet enough, and again, this would be meditation or just whatever quiet time looks like, and you can listen to that small, still voice, we do get guidance. I totally agree with you. And it might be, this wasn't the plan. You are giving yourself away in this codependent relationship. What makes you happy?
Right. Exactly. What fills your cup?
Yeah.
I had somebody ask me that once, and I didn't have an answer. And that's when I knew I was in trouble.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's huge. And when people say, I don't know, I don't have time to think of that. You think, oh, honey, yeah, please take some time for yourself.
Yeah,
but
it's like
go ahead.
No, I was going to say, it's like you're so lost, you forgot who you are.
Exactly. And in this Western society that so emphasizes staying busy and being productive and getting things done, that when we aren't being productive, quote unquote, and when we aren't, doing what we think we should do, sitting quietly and listening to that small, still voice isn't something that is necessarily smiled upon.
Yeah. I know you mentioned meditation a few times, and I think that's something that's intimidating to people because they have maybe a misunderstanding of what meditation is. It's not, it is, part of it is, I think, sitting quietly. But I think people have higher expectations on how they have to do it. I'm curious, how do you use meditation? I know you mentioned using it with perhaps writing groups, probably in your own personal life, I imagine, but what role does that play for you with regards to creativity?
Oh, huge, huge. The first time I meditated was definitely a jump in the deep end. My husband and I, we weren't married yet, but my boyfriend then, my husband now, Jeff and I went to India, and we did a 10-day silent meditation course, a Vipassana course, and it was hellacious. Absolutely hellacious. I told you I'm a wordsmith. I love words. I like talking. I like writing. There was no journals, no books, no talking. It was, oh my gosh, and scary. What came out in my head? Oi, it was scary. But what I learned there was some of the basics of sitting meditation. But what I learned later in some kinder courses is you don't have to sit, on a zafu in lotus position. You don't have to do that. You don't have to have a candle that you stare at for 30 minutes. You don't, meditation can be anything that allows you to go in for yourself. It does have to be without staring at a screen. I mean, some people stare at a candle on a screen, and if that's what works, that's okay. But when you say, "What do you do for quiet time?" and someone says, "Oh, I sit and watch a movie," that's not really the best way to get engaged with yourself. Or I sit and read. Well, again, that's engaging your brain in a process. So it has to be something, in my opinion, where you are getting quiet enough without any external stuff, where you can get quiet and listen. And it can be, one of the ways I meditate is I wake up first thing in the morning, before I get up, before I do anything, and I will sit up in bed and think of what I'm grateful for. And I will have a few things that I'm grateful for, and then I just sit quietly and just allow. And I don't have a timer, and I don't think, oh, it has to be 15 minutes. It's just allow that. And when I feel myself spinning is a word that I use, where I'm like starting four different things. I'm walking from one room to the other. I think, oh, I gotta, and I don't finish anything. And I know that I'm getting caught up in this. Whoa, I'll go sit quietly in another room and just calm myself, because I realize I'm just getting too scattered. My head's getting too chaotic. But I think that's one of the things that hurts people a lot when they're trying to meditate, is there's this whole Eastern philosophy thing that says, well, I can't do that. I can't do that. So don't do it a different way. How does it work for you? What works? And a lot of times in groups that I was running with women, we journal a bit, sort of get something out and then put it down, and then just sit quietly and say, did anything come up from that? What's up for you? Just sitting quietly. And then I actually do time it, because in the beginning, people get antsy. It's like, okay, how long do we actually have to sit here quietly? Like, so, say, we're just going to sit quietly for 10 minutes and see what came up from that writing. Just don't say anything. You can close your eyes if you want. You don't have to. Just don't look at your phone, and just sit. And generally, after you've waited a little while, you'll start to your heart rate slows. Your body stops frenetically moving. And soon we can start hearing our inner voice more, and be able to listen to that. But it does take time.
Yeah, I think it's like anything. It takes time and practice, and just turning off that voice inside your head. That's constantly reminding you of, hey, you've got these three things to do today, and next week you've got this deadline, and well, what's the next project going to be after that? I mean, those are real, and
Yeah.
you have to figure out a way to say to yourself, those things will be there after these 10 minutes are up. So let's
Yeah.
just acknowledge them and park them, and just try and bring yourself back to the present moment. I think so many of us have a hard time living in the present moment because of that.
Mm,
I mean, I know
yeah.
somebody in my life who is so worried about what's going to happen at 5 o'clock. At 9 o'clock in the morning, they're worried about what's going to happen at 5. and that
Yeah.
prevents them. I say, tell them, I'm like, that's a problem. I'm like, you need to figure out a way to address that, because while you don't think it's impacting your life, you're not able to enjoy anything in the moment because you're so
Yeah.
worried about what's happening in the future.
Yeah.
And it's tough. And I'm not saying I'm perfect at it, but I do have that ability to acknowledge that, okay, well, this will be there when I'm done doing what I have to do right now.
Exactly. I mean, I think that's sort of our life lesson for all of us. It's learning to be present in the moment, even, for a couple of minutes at a time. Most of us are going in various directions, thinking about, oh, God, I wish I hadn't have said that. Oh, God, I wish this had been different. Or, oh my God, what am I going to? Oh, what about when? I'm having this wonderful time with our son and grandson, and really knowing that we're being helpful. But a lot of the day, I can't lie, it's thinking about, oh, I'm going to really miss my grandson when we leave, instead of just being present in that moment right there. So yeah, it's a real hard one to do, and it takes practice.
I know we've talked both about journaling and meditation, and I'm curious about sort of the converging of the two. Do you ever practice or teach automatic writing at all?
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. That's wonderful. I first did that. Well, I've done it in several different workshops that I've participated in. The first time I did it was in early sobriety, and we did an inner child workshop and wrote with our non-dominant hand. And did writing, and with the non-dominant hand just sort of connected us to that, not trying to do it right thing. It's like it's a struggle, and and it became more smooth, and then moved into the dominant hand, and just sort of let what was that experience, and just sort of writing it and writing it out. It's that whole thing of writing it out, of just being present with what comes, and like I said, taking dictation as to what's coming. It's fun when it's in a story, but even if it's not in a story, just listening and journaling. That's why are you familiar with Julia Cameron's Artist's Way?
I'm not, no.
Oh, it's a wonderful book, Mike. I think you'd really love it. I recommend it to anybody that's interested in doing some writing. She recommends morning pages, where you wake up in the morning, and before you start your day, excuse me, before you start your day, you just write for, choose an amount of time, 10 minutes. So you get up 10 minutes earlier than you'd have to, and you just write. And if you don't have anything to say, you say, I have nothing to say. I don't know what to say. I don't know what to say. And you just write, and you keep writing. And it's like, oh, this is dumb. Now, why am I doing this? And then pretty soon things start coming up, and you listen. And after you've been doing it for a while, it's, it's a flow. It's things come. It's just writing it out.
Yeah. I imagine you discover some pretty interesting things that way.
Absolutely. Oh, completely. It's therapeutic in its own right.
Yeah. Yeah, I think journaling in general is therapeutic. I got the nudge a couple weeks ago. So we were talking about the nudge earlier. I lost my mother this year, and
I'm
I
sorry.
lost my brother the year before. So it's been, a couple of hard years
Yeah.
in our family. And it's funny, I was doing a Reiki session with the Reiki healer who I've been seeing for almost a year now. And she kept asking me how the book is coming along. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, I was writing a piece of fiction. And she's like, no, 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 the waiting room. How's the waiting room coming along? And I told her, I'm not writing anything called the waiting room right now. Like, I was writing something called visiting hours. And she's like, no, no, the waiting room, the waiting room. And I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, it was one of these things that was, just so out there that I just sort of put on the side. Well, I get sick over the holidays, and like sick, where I'm like in bed for like 5 or 6 straight days.
Ooh.
But that's when the nudge hits me. And I'm like, well, what if there were a waiting room?
I love it.
And what if this waiting room was really a metaphor for something else? And so I started banging out these pages. Next thing I know, I've got 30,000 words
Wow.
over like 9 days, which is I've never written that fast in my life. And it could be a shitty first draft, as we were talking about this morning. I don't know, but I feel like it's a complete story. But it all came to me like fast, like to the point where I was not sleeping at night, and I should have been sleeping because I was really tired because I was sick. But I just kept having ideas. Like I just kept getting these downloads of what has to
I
happen
love
next.
it. I love it.
And then I would just like jot down notes in the middle of the night, and then I'd wake up in the morning and start writing. And next thing I know, I got 30,000 words on the waiting room.
Wow.
It's
Oh,
just
I
like,
love it.
but it was all like inner, I don't even know. Like I don't know where the story came from, but it,
Yeah.
it did, but it was very therapeutic in the sense that I worked out a lot of issues that I actually had with my relationship with my mom. And not saying that
Wow.
we weren't tight. We were very, very tight. We were very close. Um, to the point where my twin brother and I were born on her birthday. Like it was, we were
Wow.
very, very close. But there was some unresolved resentment that I had, um,
Wow.
which turns out to be the source of codependency. So,
Imagine that. Yeah.
and that all
Yep.
kind of came to me, and that was all revealed to me in this book, which I don't know what I'll do with it. I mean, it's novella. It's yeah, it's certainly not mainstream fiction, but we'll see. But it's
I just love that the Reiki healer was picking it up and just saying it's right there, it's right
yeah,
there. But I think this happens more often than people acknowledge because we aren't listening, or it's like, oh, that was just bizarre, or that was a quote unquote coincidence, those wonderful little things. And yet when we listen and things like that happen, it's like, oh, I love that story.
yeah,
It's like that's wonderful.
yeah. I've
And
written that.
so for you, that having a novella, whether you decide to sell it or not, what a therapeutic process. What a wonderful whew, growth
Yeah.
experience.
I mean, it really is a lesson in family dynamics. That whole story is
Mm.
it's pretty interesting. But I've
I'd love to read it, by the way.
I'll send you the shitty first draft, Patty.
Good. Okay.
The I've interviewed almost 400 authors now on this show, and one thing that so many of them have in common is following that curiosity that what I would call like normal everyday people would probably disregard. So, for example, like that interaction you might have with somebody on your commute that morning that just stays with you, and then you follow it to 80,000 words later, you've got a story. So often I hear that happening where somebody just says, you know what, I had this one brief interaction. I didn't think anything of it, but boom, it inspired, this book. I'm curious about that for you in
Oh,
terms of,
absolutely.
is that the author's superpower? I mean, being able to follow your curiosity in that way?
You know what, Mike? I believe it's everybody's superpower. I think that curiosity is that nudge, and if we allow ourselves to follow that curiosity, all kinds of doors open up. But most of us don't, and it saddens me how little curiosity I encounter sometimes. It's like my husband and I will be at a get together of some kind, and we'll leave, and I'll say, "Did anyone ask you any questions?" And he'll say, "No," and I'll say, "Yeah, me neither." And to me, that's sort of sad, and it sort of speaks to, I guess, it speaks to our culture now that there's a lack of curiosity in general. But going back to your question, I totally agree, and that if we decide that we are going to prioritize being open to this, being open to life, being open to these taps, these nudges, these interactions, it's amazing how many happen to us in one day. I can see somebody pass and I'll think, now that's a really interesting outfit, and or something, and think, wow, what's behind that? And if I were to allow myself, I could probably go down a rabbit hole with it and write a fun story, or having several different things that my grandson has done, or a couple of things that happened today, and think I could absolutely write a wonderful story about that. Or, as you said, you interact with a person, they tell you part of a story, and you think, ooh, I want to know more about that. And I think curiosity is everyone's superpower, Mike. You say a writer's superpower. I think it's all of us, because it's part of that inspiration that we all have. When people say, "Oh, I can't write," yeah, you can. Maybe you're not great with punctuation, etc., but who cares? But tell me a story. Oh, I can't paint. Well, you probably aren't going to go sell it at a gallery, but of course you can paint. Here's a brush, there's some paint. Go put some color, and allowing the curiosity that can lead to, creativity. I'm a firm believer in that. And I love you for asking that question.
Well, that's the first person you're the first person to tell me that they love me today. So I'll remember that, Patty. Um, no, I think you're right. The writing prompts are all around us if we're willing to pay attention to them. And I think some people think that, okay, well, what's the point of writing about this little experience because I'm not going to sell it, or it's not really part of the story I'm writing. But to me, it's like, it's like going to the gym, right? You're kind of training for something. Maybe you're training for something. I don't know. But it's like exercising that muscle so it doesn't go dormant. Um, and you never know what's gonna come out of a writing session or a journaling session or something like that.
Yeah. And tied into that, if you are ever a part of a writers group, and I think most writers are at one point or another, we often get writing prompts that the facilitator or that someone online puts up. And that's not as related to us. We can go in and we can find ourselves in it and write from it. But if we're curious in our day-to-day lives right now, and I see something or hear something and I get chills, that's it. That's impacted me right there. I feel the chills. I either saw it or heard it or overheard it or felt it and thought, oh, and now it's personal. And then, as you said, I'll journal about that. Or if I have a dream, and I'll journal about that, and then it could lead to a story, maybe, or something else. But that's not why I'm writing about it. I'm writing about it because there's a kernel there. I want to explore it.
Right, right. And something inside you said, "Hey, this is something to pay attention to." And for you, it's
Yeah.
chills, or yeah, for me, it's being woken up in the middle of the night and not being able to let the idea go. But well, this has been a very interesting conversation, Patty. Very enlightening. I'm curious. Any final remarks or closing thoughts for people with regards to Recovery Road Trip?
With regards to Recovery Road Trip, well, with regards to Recovery Road Trip, if you have read it, are interested in reading it, etc., I just love hearing from people. So in terms of that, I would love to hear from you. You can find me at patticlark.org, and you can, make a comment. I love hearing from people, and I personally always answer any emails or correspondence that I get. But what I would say to any writers out there, and I know that it's mostly writers that are listening to your podcasts, is that don't give up. A writer is not, you aren't born a writer. I mean, well, maybe Ernest Hemingway was, I don't know, but we nurture it and play with it. And yeah, you might not sell your first book. You might not ever sell a book. But if you're feeling that desire to write, to me, that's part of the nudge, and that's the universe speaking to you. And wow, what a wonderful gift to actually get the nudge. So write. You might not ever do anything with it, but write for writing's sake, because in my opinion, that's a wonderful gift of life.
Yeah. I think you just gave me the title of this episode, which is For Writing's Sake. I love it. I love it. Patty, I know you mentioned your website, patticlark.org. Are you also active on Instagram or Facebook or any of those social media platforms?
Yeah. I think part of, if you are a published author these days, you kind of have to be. I mean, before I signed my contract, I actually had to say I have a platform and I am promoting my platform, and that's it's part of the process. So yes, Patti Clark Writer on Facebook, Patti Clark Writer on Instagram. I'm on Blue Sky. I'm on Threads. I'm on all of them. And you can find a lot of the stuff that on my website for some of the writing that I do. Some of the when I get articles that are out there, I usually put those up on my website too, but I get them up on social media when I can as well. I do a lot of writing about women and drinking and women in recovery and just sort of women's looking to feel comfortable in our skin.
Yeah, which is which is hard to do at many times. Many times it is hard to feel comfortable in our skin. But I thank you so much for the work you are doing and what you've shared with us today, and of course in both of your books. I will put links to everything in our show notes. So if you're listening, you just go right to the show notes and you can find Patti any which way you'd like. And I'll say, Patti, thank you so much for stopping by Uncorking a Story and letting me uncork yours.
Thanks so much, Mike. I appreciate your time.
Thanks for listening to Uncorking a Story. If you'd like more information about today's guest or to find out more about Mike, go to uncorkingastory.com. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review us at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Tune in every week to hear Mike Carlon uncork a new story.